My name is Vivian, but most people call me Viv. I am 29 years old. I grew up in a house with 17 rooms. I had a cook and a driver and a woman who did my laundry. My parents are very wealthy. My grandfather built a company that grew into something large. I grew up never thinking about money because money was simply always there. When you grow up with everything, you start to wonder about something. You start to wonder what people would think of you without all of it, without the house and the name and the driver, without the school and the clothes and the connections. You start to wonder if people like you or if they like what surrounds you. I started wondering this when I was about 22. I did not stop wondering for a long time. By 27, I was tired of the world I lived in. The men I met at the parties my parents organized. The men who looked at me and already knew my last name before they shook my hand. The ones who talked to my father before they talked to me. The ones who were interested in the company more than in me. I wanted something different. I was not sure what exactly, but something different. Then one summer my parents went to their house in the south of France for 6 weeks. They asked me to come with them. I said I needed to stay for work. That was half true. I did have some work, but the real reason was different. I wanted 6 weeks without my family's world around me. 6 weeks of being just Vivian. Not Vivian Marchetti of the Marchetti family. I rented a small apartment in a neighborhood across the city from where I usually lived. I furnished it simply. I bought cheap things, a small table, 2 chairs, a bed with plain sheets. I wore simple clothes. I did not drive my car. I took the bus. I bought groceries at the local market. I bought less than I was used to buying, and I ate simpler food, and I found I liked it. 3 weeks into my 6 weeks, I went to a small coffee shop near my rented apartment. It was not a fashionable coffee shop. It was just a coffee shop. Old wooden chairs, a chalkboard menu. Good coffee, though. I sat there most mornings with my notebook and wrote things, not important things. Just thoughts. I had always wanted to do that. I had never taken the time. He had brown hair and an honest face. He was wearing a plain dark blue shirt. He had the kind of hands that looked like they did real work. After a few minutes, he looked up and apologized. He said, "Sorry, was my music too loud?" I said, "I had not noticed it." He said, "Good." He was worried. He smiled. He had a very honest smile. His name was Ben. He worked in a small architecture firm in the neighborhood. Not a big firm, just 3 people. He was the most junior. He said he came to this coffee shop every morning because the coffee was the best in the area and because the owner knew his order already and never made him say it. He said he was a man of simple pleasures. He said it without any irony at all. We talked for an hour that morning. Then I had to go. He waved goodbye. The next morning, I went back at the same time. He was there. We talked again. This continued for the rest of the week. By Friday, we had talked every morning. By Friday, I knew his last name and his coffee order and the name of the architecture firm and the fact that he had a younger sister in another city and that he liked very long walks, but only in good weather. He knew I was staying in the neighborhood temporarily. He knew I had a notebook I wrote in every morning. He knew I took my coffee black. That is what he knew. He did not know my last name. He did not know my family. He did not know my apartment with the 17 rooms, or my parents in the south of France, or the company with my grandfather's name on it. Ben asked me to lunch at the end of the first week. He knew a good, cheap noodle place 2 streets over. He said it was the best lunch in the neighborhood for under 10 euros. He was right about the coffee, and he was right about the noodles. We talked for 2 hours at that lunch about books and architecture and the neighborhood and what we wanted from our lives. He talked to me like I was a person he was genuinely curious about. I should have told him the truth early, I know that now. In the first week, or the second week at the latest, I should have said, Ben, my name is Vivian Marchetti, and I am from a wealthy family, and I am here because I needed to be someone other than myself for a while. I should have said it. I did not. The longer I did not say it, the harder it became to say. By the end of the 6 weeks, I was not going back to my family's side of the city. I extended the rental. I told my parents I needed more time in the city. They were a little confused, but they did not push. I stayed in my small apartment. I kept going to the coffee shop. I kept seeing Ben. We had become something more than coffee neighbors by then. We were walking through the park on Sundays. We were calling each other in the evenings. Ben knew I had some kind of work, but he never pushed on details. He talked mostly about what things meant to him, rather than what they cost. He talked about the buildings he was designing. He talked about his sister. He talked about a park he wanted to visit in Portugal someday. He was saving for it. He had a small saving account, and he added a little to it each month. He said it like it was a normal thing, like it was plenty. I had never saved for anything in my life. I had never needed to. Everything I wanted, I could have. I sat across from this man at his small kitchen table while he cooked rice and beans and called it Tuesday dinner, and I felt something I had not expected. I felt comfortable, genuinely comfortable. Not the performed comfort of a person in the right restaurant at the right table, wearing the right dress. Actual, quiet, comfortable. 4 months into this new life, Ben told me he loved me. We were on the bus of all places. We were sitting near the back. He just said it. He said, Vivian, I think I love you. He said it matter-of-factly, like it was something he had thought carefully and decided was true. He did not make a big speech. He just said it. I looked at him on the bus, and I felt something very large in my chest. I said, I think I love you too. My parents found out I was still in the city. They were back from France. My mother called and said she and my father were coming to take me to dinner. I said I was busy. She said it was not a request. Parents of a certain kind say things are not requests. I agreed to dinner. A restaurant I had been to hundreds of times, a restaurant Ben would have to save up for several months to visit. My parents sat across from me and immediately wanted to know why I was living in a small apartment across the city. My father used the word strange. My mother used the word concerning. I said I was fine. I said I needed space. They nodded, but I could see they did not understand. I was quiet for 1 second too long. She said, she said I was. I told Em about Ben. I said he was an architect. My father said which firm. My father nodded, the way he nodded when he was filing something in the category of unimportant. He asked about Ben's family. I gave the same kind of vague answers. My father nodded again. My mother looked at me in that particular way she had. She said, Viv, does he know who you are? I said no. She said, Vivian. I said, I know. After dinner, I went home to my small apartment and sat on my simple bed and thought about it. I had been living this other life for 5 months. Ben loved me in this life. He had chosen me, not for my name, or my family, or my money. He had chosen the version of me who wore simple dresses and took the bus and came to the coffee shop every morning with a notebook. That was still me, but I had been hiding a large part of me. 6 months after we met, Ben asked me to move in with him. He had a small apartment, 1 street from the coffee shop, 2 small rooms, a tiny balcony where he kept a plant, and 2 chairs. He said he wanted to cook for me every night. He said he wanted to share the small balcony with me in the mornings. He said he had thought about it carefully, and I was the person he wanted to share his life with. I said yes. I moved my simple things into his small apartment. I put my books on his shelf. We cooked dinner together. We sat on the small balcony in the mornings. He made better coffee than the shop. I had not told him the truth yet. The guilt was large. It was very large. Sitting in his small kitchen while he cooked and talked and laughed, I felt the weight of what I had not said pressing on me from inside. 7 months after we met, Ben came home with a small box. He sat down across from me at the kitchen table. He said he had been saving for 3 months. He opened the box. Inside was a simple silver ring, not expensive, small. He said he hoped someday he could give me something better. He said, but this was what he had right now, and he wanted to ask me right now, because he did not want to wait. He said, Vivian, will you marry me? Not politely, actually crying, the kind of crying you cannot control. He looked startled. He reached across the table and took my hand. He said, hey. He said he was sorry if the timing was bad. He said we did not have to decide right now. He said he could wait. He was always willing to wait. That was one of the truest things about him. I said, Ben, stop. I said, I need to tell you something first. He looked at me. I said, if you still want to ask me the question after I tell you this, then yes. He said, okay. His face was very open, very patient, very Ben. I took a breath. I said, my family owns the Marchetti Group. I said I grew up with a lot of money. I said I had been hiding it since the day we met. He did not say anything for a long moment. He looked at me. Then he looked around his small apartment. Then he looked back at me. He said the coffee shop. I said yes. He said the bus. I said yes. He said the small apartment you said you were renting temporarily. I said yes. He said all of it. I said the feelings were always real. I said I was hiding the circumstances, not the person. He stood up. He walked to the kitchen. He stood at the counter with his back to me for a while. I waited. Then he turned around. He said, why? I said because I had spent my whole life meeting people who only saw my family's name. I said I wanted to meet someone who would see me. I said he was the first person I had met in years who looked at me without knowing what my name meant. I said I did not want to lose that. He thought about this. He said, but you let it go on for 7 months. I said yes. I said I was scared. I said I should have told you sooner. I said I am sorry. He said I am not a charity, Vivian. He said I did not fall in love with the idea of being with someone poor. He said I fell in love with you. He said the rest of it is just the rest of it. He said it was quite a large rest of it, but still. He sat back down. He picked up the ring box from the table. He said, "Okay." He said, "Here is what I know." He said he had spent 7 months getting to know me. He said we had talked about hundreds of things. He said he knew how I took my coffee. He said he knew I was terrible at navigating but refused to admit it. He said he knew I cried at documentaries about animals. He said he knew I was the kindest person he had ever met. He said he did not know the other part. He said that would take time to understand. He said he was not going to pretend. It was not a lot of new information. But he said he did not think a person's bank account changed who they were in a kitchen at 7 in the morning. He said he still knew exactly who I was in a kitchen at 7 in the morning. He said he hoped I was still the same person there. I said I was. He nodded. He said he believed me. He said it slowly and carefully, like someone who was deciding to believe something and choosing to do it anyway. He opened the ring box again. He said, "Vivian Marchetti." He said, "Do you still want to answer the question?" I said yes. He said, "Will you marry me?" I said yes before he finished the sentence. The same as it would always be. We were married 8 months later. Not in a small church this time. My parents had some opinions about the venue, but I held my ground on the important things. Ben wore the same honest face he had worn in the coffee shop that first morning. My parents tried very hard to like him. My mother succeeded faster than my father. By the end of the dinner, my father had asked Ben 3 questions about architecture and was genuinely interested in the answers. We still live in Ben's small apartment. He has offered to move somewhere larger. I say not yet. I like the small balcony. I like the 2 chairs. I like the mornings with coffee and the plant and the city below us. I have enough large rooms in the rest of my life. I do not need them here too. Ben understands this. He always understands the things that matter. My name is Vivian. I am 29 years old. I spent my whole life inside a world built by my family. I walked out of it for 6 weeks to find out who I was without it. I found out I was someone who liked cheap noodles and long bus rides and notebooks and honest faces. And I found someone who loved that person exactly as she was. The ring he gave me is simple and small. I have never worn any jewelry I love more. There is a lot I did not tell Ben about those 6 weeks. The things I noticed, the ways my life was different without the name, and the money surrounding it. I noticed that people looked at me differently. In my usual life, people looked at me with recognition. They knew who I was before I spoke. They treated me with a particular kind of deference that I had always thought was just how people were. Without the name and the context, they looked at me like a person. Just a person. Someone whose face they were seeing for the first time with no prior information. It was strange. And it was wonderful. I noticed that I was more careful with money than I had ever been. I had a budget for those 6 weeks, not out of necessity, but out of the experiment. I added up small purchases before I made them. I chose the cheaper option at the market. I thought about what things cost in a way I never had before. This made me pay more attention to the quality of a piece of fruit, to the taste of a simple meal. When things are easy to replace you, stop noticing them. When they require thought, you see them differently. I noticed that I was less tired at the end of the day. This surprised me My usual life was full of beautiful things and comfortable situations, but it was also full of performance. The performance of being from a certain family, the performance of knowing the right people and saying the right things at the right events. Even when I enjoyed those things, they required something from me. In the small apartment across the city, there was no performance. I just was, and I was less tired. Ben had a life full of small pleasures, and I learned to see them the way he saw them. A good cup of coffee in the morning, a walk in the late afternoon before the light changed, a building on a street corner that he found interesting because of the way it handled a particular architectural problem. He noticed things, he paid attention, he had opinions about small things. His architecture work was like that too. He did not work on famous buildings. He worked on the kinds of buildings that fill up cities, the ordinary ones. He said ordinary buildings were more interesting than famous ones because they had to solve real problems. He said a beautiful, famous building could afford to be impractical. He said most of the world was ordinary buildings, and someone had to think carefully about them. I had never thought carefully about ordinary buildings. I thought about them after that. I started noticing them. The buildings I had walked past for years without seeing. I started asking Ben about them when we passed one. He was always ready to explain. He loved to explain. He just shared it like it was something obviously worth sharing. 6 months after we first met, I was still in the neighborhood. I had extended my rental twice. I told myself each time that it was temporary. But the truth was simpler than that. I did not want to leave. Not the neighborhood exactly. I wanted to stay near Ben. Everything else in my life could wait. My mother called every week. She said the office was asking questions. I said I would come back soon. Ben did not know any of this. He thought I was just someone who had stayed longer than planned because she liked the coffee shop. The morning I told him the truth was a Saturday. He had made breakfast at his apartment, eggs and toast and good coffee. We were sitting at his small table. The sun was coming through the window. Biscuit, the neighbor's dog, was visiting, as he sometimes did. Everything was very ordinary and very nice, and I thought, I cannot sit here in this ordinary nice morning and keep hiding something this large. I said, Ben, I have to tell you something. He put down his coffee. He said, okay. He looked at me the way he always looked at me, fully, like I was worth his complete attention. I said, my name is Vivian Marchetti. I said, my family owns the Marchetti Group. I said, I have been hiding it since the day we met. I said, I am sorry. He was very quiet. He looked at me for a long time. Then he looked at his eggs. Then back at me. He said, Vivienne. I said, yes. He said, is your name actually Vivienne? I said, yes. He said, you are not called Viv from a normal family. I said, no. He said, right. He picked up his coffee. He put it down. He said, right. He was quiet for a while, long enough that the eggs went cold. Then he said, can I ask you one question before I process any of this? I said, yes. He said, the coffee shop. I said, yes. He said, the bus. I said, yes. He said, the way you counted change at the market that one time, like it mattered. He said, all of that was real. I said, yes. All of that was real. He said, good. He said, that is the part I know. Ben is not a dramatic person. He does not make large gestures. When he is thinking about something difficult, he gets very quiet and thorough. He went through it carefully. He asked questions. He wanted to understand, not why I had money, but why I had hidden it. He listened completely. He did not interrupt. When I finished, he was quiet again for a while. He said, "Vivian, here is what I know about you." He said, "I know how you take your coffee, and that you are terrible at navigating, but will not admit it." He said, "I know you cry at documentaries about animals." He said, "I know you have opinions about bread that other people do not expect." He said, "I know you are the kindest person I have ever met, and the most genuine and the funniest in a quiet way that people do not always notice at first." He said, "I know all of this." He said the rest of it is new information. He said it will take him some time, but he said none of it changes what he knows. We were married 8 months after that Saturday morning. My family had opinions about the venue and the guest list. I held my ground on the important things. My mother succeeded faster than my father in liking Ben. By the end of the engagement dinner, my father had asked him 3 questions about architecture and was genuinely interested in the answers. Ben answered them carefully and thoroughly, the way he answered everything. My father respects a person who takes a question seriously. Ben takes every question seriously. I had known that from the first morning in the coffee shop. We still live in Ben's apartment near the coffee shop. It is small, it has his books and my things, and one shelf for both of us that we argued pleasantly about for an afternoon. The other days I work on a project Ben and I started together, a foundation that funds design work in communities that cannot afford good architecture. We met because of a coffee shop and an honest face, and I spend my time now trying to make ordinary spaces better for ordinary people. Ben would say, "That is the most important work." He would be right. My name is Vivian. I am 29 years old. I have a husband with an honest face and soft hands and opinions about buildings. I have a ring that is simple and small, and that I love more than any jewelry I have ever worn. Not the life I was born into, not the life anyone expected, the one I walked across a city in plain clothes to find. I found it, and I am never going back. One last thing I want to tell you about my parents. My father came around to Ben slowly. This took longer than I expected and also less time than I feared. The architecture conversations helped. Then a dinner happened where Ben had done some research on a building project my father was involved in. He had opinions. My father listened. Then my father had opinions back. They argued politely for 45 minutes. My mother and I sat at the other end of the table and exchanged looks. By the end of the dinner, my father said to Ben, "You are an interesting man." For my father, this was the equivalent of a full embrace. My mother was faster. She pulled me aside at a family event about 3 months into the engagement. She said, "Vivian, he looks at you like you are the most interesting thing in any room." I said yes. She said, "Do you know how rare that is?" She said, "Good." She said, "Keep him." I said, "I plan to." She nodded. She went back to the event. That was the conversation. Short and completely sufficient. The wedding was on a Saturday in October. Ben wore a suit. He had bought it specifically. He had consulted no one about it. He came out of the dressing room and said, "Is this right?" And I said, "Yes, that is very right. And he said good, because he had spent a long time thinking about it, and he was glad to hear it. I wore a simple dress, not the enormous gown my mother had hoped for. A simple, elegant dress. I had chosen it myself in a small shop with one helpful woman and no pressure. I looked at it in the mirror and thought, yes, that is right. Ben had not seen it before the wedding. When I walked toward him, his expression was the same one he had worn the morning I told him the truth. Quiet and full and completely present. We said the words, small, simple, true words. We signed the papers. We had dinner with the people we loved. Ben and my father talked about buildings for 20 minutes at the reception, and my mother and I pretended we were not watching them. Biscuit, the neighbor's dog, was not invited, but Ben had arranged for a photo of him to be printed and framed as a small table decoration because he thought it would make me laugh. It did. I am 29 years old. I walked across the city in plain clothes 6 weeks ago to find out who I was without my family's name around me. I found out I was someone who liked cheap noodles and long walks and the company of a man with honest hands and a patient heart. I found out that love that does not know your last name is the truest kind. I found out that the ordinary things are the ones that last. Ben taught me that. He teaches me something every day. I am grateful for every morning in that coffee shop, for every morning since. 2 years later, I was sitting at the table in our small apartment. Ben was sketching something. He does this often in the evenings. He sketches buildings and spaces, and sometimes just shapes. Biscuit from next door was asleep on the floor. This was a regular Tuesday evening, completely unremarkable. I looked around at it, and I thought about the first Tuesday I had sat in the coffee shop with my notebook. How different my life was now, and how much the same. Still a notebook, still coffee, still paying attention to small things. Ben looked up and saw me looking at him. He said, "What?" I said, "Nothing." I said I was just looking. He said, "At what?" I said, "At this. At all of this." He looked around the small apartment at the books and the sketches and the sleeping dog and the remains of dinner on the table. He said yes. He said he liked it too. He went back to his sketch. I went back to my book. That was the whole conversation. That was enough. That is always enough. I grew up with everything. I had to go without it to understand what everything actually was. It was not the house with 17 rooms. It was not the driver or the cook or the name on the building. Everything is the morning in the small apartment, the coffee from the shop on the corner, the man with honest hands reading next to me on a regular Tuesday evening, the work that matters, the life I walked across the city to find. If you feel like the life you are living is not quite yours yet, if something is missing but you cannot name it, what is missing is probably very simple and very near. It is probably in a coffee shop around the corner. It is probably across a small table from someone who has not introduced themselves yet. Go find it. Take the bus. Wear simple clothes. Pay attention. The ordinary things are the ones that hold. The honest things are the ones that last. The best things in my life arrived in the most ordinary moments. I was paying attention. I was paying attention, and so was he, and that was all it took. My name is Vivian. I chose this life. Every single morning, I choose it again. I will keep choosing it. For as long as I have mornings to choose in,